Well, welcome back to another edition of Sex, Addiction, and the Missing Piece. And for those of you who might be watching this podcast rather than just listening to it, watching it on YouTube or another video outlet, you might notice that I'm sharing the screen with a lovely young lady that I have the pleasure of being my very first guest on Sex, Addiction, and the Missing Piece podcast. And she happens to be somebody I know very well, and actually I'm very fond of. In fact, believe it or not, we actually share the last name, the same last name. Go figure. She's my wife, okay? So Holly Donaldson is going to be joining me today. She's twofold. Number one, there's some information, of course, that I want to share with you. And number two, I haven't had a guest on the podcast before, so she's a little bit of a guinea pig. So she's a good sport and willing to play along. And so hopefully we'll also generate some interesting information for you as well as doing this test run with a guest. Now I'm going to be reading something here that the show's a little bit scripted today in that I've got some questions and introduction that I'm going to be looking down to my left. So I don't want you to think I've developed a twitch or something. I'm actually reading. So while I am now, if you haven't heard, I'm now officially a board certified sex therapist. Thank you very much. So I'm board certified to talk to people about sex. Holly, on the other hand, my wonderful wife, she's a certified financial planner. She's board certified to talk to people about money because sex and money are two things people really don't talk about very much. We don't expect to get invited to any post-COVID parties. Don't invite them. They're going to bring up, taboo subjects, sex and money. Anyways, Holly has been a lifelong student of economics. She holds a master's degree in it, as well as also an MBA, a master's in business administration, both from the University of South Florida. Go Bulls. Although she spent a lot of her career early on in banking, helping people in company with their finances, in the early 2000s, she became intrigued with behavioral economics. And if that's an unusual term to you, it was to me also when she first told me that, which is otherwise referred to as the psychology of money. She then wrote a book about it in layman's language called The Mindful Money Mentality. That's The Mindful Money Mentality. I personally think it's the second best book ever written. In case you're wondering what the first book, that would be that one over my left shoulder. And it's only because my mom said it was the best book ever written. It's a great book, honestly. And she recently also created an online course called Retirement Readiness. And this is for people who are concerned with how they will transition from working and saving to spending those savings. You can read all about that and everything else about Holly on her website, which is www.holly, Holly, Donaldson. It's like son of a Donald.com. www.hollydonaldson.com. So Holly, without any further ado, first of all, thank you for putting up with this and tolerating and being the first guinea pig. I really appreciate you being here today. When you first heard that I was doing a podcast as somewhat of a spinoff from my PhD project, and that it was entitled Sex, Addiction, and the Missing Piece, what were your first thoughts and feelings when I told you that?
Well, when you first told me the title of the podcast, and hello everyone, and you're welcome for being here, the guinea pig, I thought of, PIECE, because you were telling me what the title was and I didn't get it. I was confused. And in fact, I was thinking, well, that word has a bit of innuendo to it. That doesn't sound too good. Then you explained it was peace, PEACE. And oh, okay, I get it. Yes, sex addiction, missing piece, right. Okay, then it made more sense to me.
And I think when we first talked about it, you said, are you talking about like getting a piece, like sexual getting a piece, like that sort of slang saying? And I said, no, but wow, it's interesting that your mind went there, mine didn't. But I'm just saying.
Like, wouldn't that go counter to what you're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, right. That's it was, and we had fun with that conversation. So when you hear the term sexual addiction, okay, when you hear that term, I'm always curious, what's the first thing that comes to mind, like image, thought, feeling, whatever? And I've heard virtually all of it, so don't hold anything back. What's the first thing that comes to mind for you?
Well, the image that I have is of Tiger Woods because his treatment, his public embarrassment over what happened with his wife back in 2012 or 13, I think, was the first time I had heard of somebody getting treatment for sexual addiction. And as far as feelings go, honestly, I gotta say disgust. It's the feeling
And,
that comes up for me about that term and him.
and I have to say that that is a pretty typical response. Oftentimes, and I've done presentations in front of professionals and lay people alike, and I've said, sex addiction, what comes to mind? And most of the people that are willing to be honest and open, they say, I see a guy. First of all, it's always a guy. He's disheveled. He has a trench coat. He's unshaven. He stinks. He's got this sort of weird look on his face, and he got this sort of crazy look in his eyes. So I think we all have some prejudices about those two words, sex and addiction, by themselves, but pair them up side by side, and holy cow, you've got the potential of like, oh, that doesn't sound so great. But as you've come to find out, it's not really about yucky stuff. But like you were saying, the first thing that came to your mind was Tiger Woods, the celebrities. And that oftentimes seems to be really the only thing that makes the media, the mainstream media, is when a celebrity gets caught or says, oh, it was because of sexual addiction. And we don't really, the normal average everyday person doesn't really get a reflection or a taste of what sexual addiction really is. So now you've had the, I'm going to say pleasure, honor, job, and sometimes you've read some of the research for my PhD project, the very early stages of it. Share a little bit about what your impressions were, not so much about my writing, you don't have to be critical about that, but what were your impressions as you began to read some of what I was putting together from this very empirically based research that I was uncovering?
Well, first of all, you're a great writer.
Thank you.
Second of all, what I learned from the research was that well, first of all, that it's a fairly new field. And a lot of the research is like in the last 20 years, I guess, or maybe last 10 years. So there are mixed labels, and I don't know if confusion is the right word, but just a lack of protocols and standards in the research on what to call things, what kind of data to measure, how to conduct research and things. So I think that that's just too bad, but it's a area that the that there needs to be improvement on, and there will be if there continues to be research, but it's got to be a very difficult thing to do a PhD project or dissertation on when you kind of have no guardrails or no yellow lines to stay between. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. The analogy that comes to mind is that we're figuring out how to fly as we're building the airplane.
Yeah.
And I say that in that I'll do some research, I'll get a little segment written, and I'll go back and like a new piece of research will come up, recent research that sort of debunks what I just got done writing. Like, oh, okay. So sexual addiction is really, I mean, it's just given birth. Really, it has, even though it's been something talked about, addressed somewhat in the mainstream of psychotherapy for 40 years now, really, or at least 30 years. But if we look at the whole world of psychology and addiction, those worlds, even though we've been at it for a long time, we're still really just scratching the surface. So it makes sense that there is a lot of uncertainty and a lot of confusion and a lot of mixed opinions, and different people are measuring different things and getting different outcomes. And the good news is that there is more and more research, and eventually this is going to come together and it's going to make sense. It just happens to be, instead of a 500 piece or 1,000 piece jigsaw puzzle, this is like 100,000 piece jigsaw puzzle, which is going to take a while to put it all together. So Holly, you've heard me present before about addiction in general, not specifically sexual addiction, to both professional groups and the general public. In fact, that was one of our first times we met. You came to a presentation that was open to the public that I did over at Turning Point of Tampa, I believe. And you brought some family members. It was the whole clan was there, or at least half the clan was there.
Yep.
What are your thoughts about what people need to hear most about addiction, both from, and I'm talking just generally about addiction, you don't have to address specifically sexual addiction, both from a prevention perspective and also from an intervention perspective?
From a prevention perspective, and this is not my area at all, it's yours, but it seems to me that the more people learn emotional intelligence, which is something I've learned a lot about from reading your book and knowing you, the more people have emotional intelligence, the better able they are to identify their feelings and then hopefully talk about their feelings and find other ways to process their feelings than turning to mood altering substances or unhealthy extreme behaviors, I'll say. So I think that one of the keys for prevention is learning emotional intelligence and how to handle feelings.
Okay.
The second, and for intervention, I think it's important for people who might be struggling with someone who's struggling with addiction to understand that they didn't cause it, they can't control it, and they can't cure it. So when it comes to intervention, the best thing somebody can do that loves someone who is struggling with addiction is get help from a professional, go to a support group, find a group of friends who've dealt with this also, and talk to them and learn to take care of yourself and process your own feelings about it first before trying to intervene on your own or get mad. It's as difficult as it is, it's difficult to get mad at someone who's addicted when they have a disease, they have a problem that needs treatment. So as far as intervention, I'd say go slowly and carefully and with professional guidance.
And you emphasize a lot about self-care there. And what comes to mind is what they tell us when we first get on the airplane before we leave, giving us instructions first about the seatbelts. I think everybody knows how to put a seatbelt on, but they still give us those instructions. And then they give us instructions about the oxygen mask. And they always say, put your oxygen mask on first before you try to help somebody else. Because if you pass out and die, there's no way you can help somebody else, right? So there's some self-care there. But I also heard a lot about communication, both in the prevention part, being able to better identify emotions and then being able to express them or have healthy outlets for them. And then also in the intervention part, finding outlets to talk about things, process things, not necessarily with the person who might be struggling with the addiction, but perhaps with a support network or friends or people who will understand for sure. Even a therapist would be a good outlet.
Imagine
right?
that, yeah.
Imagine of all people. So now I know, Holly, that you were a little bit shy about sharing with our neighbors when I entered this PhD project that my PhD was in clinical sexology. Can you share just a little bit about that shyness that you had initially?
Yeah, I think it has to do with the word sex, number one. I didn't grow up in a household that talked openly about sex, and certainly not with the neighbors. But yeah, it just some sort of lack of comfort with saying the word, first of all, and then saying that you were getting a PhD in it. So I came up with some more general term instead. So it was, I don't know why, it was just difficult for me. Now, I think I shared with you the other day that I was in a study group of financial advisors that I lead, and I let them know you were getting your PhD. And of course, they asked, in what? And I said, oh, clinical sexology. And immediately one of them made a joke about, oh, do you get to be a research subject? And I said, well, I certainly hope not, because his specialty is sexual addiction. And then they wanted to know what that meant. And I went into, of course, Tiger Woods, and they got that, and a little bit more detail that I know now about sexual addiction. But I have grown more comfortable sharing that word, clinical sexology, than I was in the beginning.
And if I remember right, I actually think the first conversation you had, and I got the sense that you weren't even expecting it. You hadn't even planned on it. Somebody, you said, oh, Ken's in a PhD. Why haven't we seen Ken? Oh, he's in a PhD program. Oh, what's he studying? And I think you shared with me, it was like psychology, just sort of a general,
Probably
and
something like that, yeah.
yeah. And I remember questioning you like, well, how come? And then we had this conversation. It's like, oh, okay, I get it. I'm so accustomed to talking about things openly that I sometimes have to remind myself that not everybody else is that open. People come to me to talk about really personal things. And oftentimes I'm the first and sometimes only one that ever hears their stories. Now, my experience with the neighbors are that I shot from the hip. I told them, when they asked, I said, oh, going to be, it's in clinical sexology. And the interesting responses I got was something like, hey, is it supposed to rain later today? Or what do you think the Yankees are going to do this year? Or, hey, what about those flowers? What are those flowers in your fire? Subject matter change, boom. So yes, there is some discomfort. The whole sex is a very short 3-letter word, and yet so very powerful, misunderstood, misused, and therefore, for some reason, we get uncomfortable with it. Whenever there's something that's not used, misunderstood, misused, there's an automatic discomfort. Now, Holly, you've seen the piles of research articles, and when I say piles, I literally mean piles, because I'm one of those people that I have to print out the articles. I got to get my hands on them. I got to highlight them. I got to make notes on them. I can't just have it a digital file. Our Canon printer, kudos to Canon. Thank you very much. I don't know how much ink this past year I've gone through, but a lot in printing all these out. So you've seen the piles of research. You also have seen the books. Then there's some days like today, there's some days or some weeks that there's like a new book coming in every day. Certainly haven't gotten around to reading them all. We got 4 of them today, but I got 4 of them today, by the way. I just keep finding all these interesting resources, and I find one and then there's a new one released. So um, and I've done all this to not only for the purpose of the PhD, but also just to upgrade my knowledge. And it's been a wonderful experience. It by far is the most challenging intellectual thing I've ever done in my whole life. This is so far beyond my graduate studies and anything else. It's in another universe. I'm just wondering, I've been in the program now for about a year. What advice or what would you say to a partner or significant other of somebody who is in a PhD program and surrounded by piles of research and books, et cetera? What advice can you give them?
I would tell them to make sure that they are asking for what they need, um, while maintaining rituals that you might have as a couple. If someone's getting their PhD, they're smart and they're focused. And getting the PhD is going to make them even more focused than they were before. So I would say that it may require more initiative to tap them on the shoulder and say, hey, I need some attention, or I need to talk, or how about you make dinner, or hopefully soon, one day, let's go out and get out of the PhD focus. Because you're very passionate about this topic. You're enjoying every minute, I can tell, of your studies. And at the same time, that doesn't mean that I, as your significant other, need to, not ask for if I need your time or your attention because you're doing the PhD program. I'm going to make sure that I'm taking care of myself, back to the self-care theme, by letting you know when I need you.
And so that really goes into really not so much about sex or addiction, but a piece on the flip side, the prevention side, about communication. And I have to say that if I may brag a little bit, I believe that we've got a wonderful level of communication, and that, quite frankly, was one of the things that really I found very attractive about you early on, is that you were willing to, number one, put yourself out there and then tell me how you feel. And then number two, you were willing to listen and learn. And we've both learned and developed and grown together. We also have some rituals that we have made sure that we leave on the calendar, PhD or no PhD. Our Sunday morning walk and talks, we generally go to a park that's about a mile away from where we live. Holly drives her car, I ride my bike. They have a 2-mile loop through this very nicely, densely wooded area. And we walk and talk. And we oftentimes will talk about something of a little bit more intimate nature. Not, I mean, sexual intimate, but deeper. If something is on one of our minds, that's oftentimes the time and the place where we'll do that. So I don't think we've missed maybe 2 or 3 Sundays in the last year at most. And then we also try at least once a month to have a day where we either have a staycation or we do a day trip. And we've been pretty good about that. In fact, I think we've got one coming up this Thursday, if I'm not mistaken. We're going to go out. Holly loves bird watching, and so she loves going out with her binoculars. I love nature photography, so I tag along and follow her with my camera. She spots them. I try to get pictures of them. She gets a better view of them than I do 9 times out of 10. Her binoculars are much more powerful than my camera lenses, but we have a good time. We get away. It gives me an opportunity to get away from the PhD. It gives us an opportunity to relax, connect, do something we both enjoy. But so that's something that the both of those are really important pieces to spouses, significant others, family members of those people who are in PhD programs. I want to get back just for a moment, Holly, to the title of the podcast, Sex, Addiction, and the Missing Piece. What do you think? Just want your opinion. I know this isn't your area of expertise, but what's your opinion? What do you think that some of the missing pieces that would lead to having a more peaceful life might be?
Sort of along the same theme of what we've said is about communication, is having the ability, if you don't feel peaceful, to connect with someone, having the courage to connect with someone. And I think of that saying, a problem shared is a problem halved. And for myself, even during the pandemic, I found it difficult to reach out to people and share whatever I was feeling. I felt that I didn't deserve to feel bad because I wasn't sick. Nobody close to me was sick, and there was so much suffering going on. How could I be suffering? But I've learned many other people felt the same way too. So one of the missing pieces, and the missing piece, is having the courage to connect and communicate your feelings, share, learn from others, listen to others, allow others to help you, and remember we're part of a community.
Right. And you shared with me, actually, your friend, your very good friend, your BFF, shared with me, she sent me an email because the two of you had a conversation just this past weekend that was a little bit challenging. And in the email, she acknowledged the courage. She said, Holly has such wonderful courage. She knew that conversation wasn't easy, and yet you stepped up and you had it. It looked like a mountain on this side of it, but once you got it behind you, you realized it was closer to the size of a molehill. And that oftentimes is the way it is in life, is that things seem huge, but then once we get into them, we get on the other side, we realize that the mind just seems to make them huge sometimes, much bigger than they are. But communicating, being open, being honest, being at least willing to put something out there, even if it doesn't get communicated in a perfect way, that it gets communicated nonetheless. So those are great missing pieces. Before we wrap up for today, Holly, I'm just wondering if there's anything else that you'd like to add regarding sex, addiction, sexual addiction, and or recovery that you would care to share.
I just hope that through your podcast and through all the research that's being done in this area, that more people will talk about sex. And of course, I hope more people will talk about money too, because money and addiction, money brings up emotions. A lot of people, the top 2 causes of divorce, I think. So I'm just hopeful that by talking about it on podcasts, by getting the subject out there in the world, that more people become comfortable sharing their struggles with it. I also hope that you, by doing this podcast, perhaps can help other professionals and in their understanding of sex addiction, sexual addiction, recovery. I think from what I understand, being on the periphery, there's a real thirst for that knowledge in the therapy community. So not only am I hoping that you'll help a lot of professionals, but that you'll help society at large by what you're doing.
And I very much, great advice. And I'm very respectful of that and very appreciative of that. We didn't mention, and I don't know that I've actually mentioned this on any of the previous podcasts. Now I'm thinking about it, I haven't mentioned it, that my PhD project, hopefully, knock on wood or whatever the saying is, it's going to be a book. Now, this is the way books work. And I've written and published one, self-published. Several others have started, but haven't gotten off the launch pad so well. Parts of them have. So the end goal is a book that's going to be very thickly research based about sexual addiction. And hopefully that will be of some help both to the professional and the lay people alike. That's my goal. So you're spot on with where I'm going. Of course, you do have some inside scoop there. So folks, we're going to call it a wrap for today. Again, I want to thank you, Holly, for taking time out of your week and doing this podcast and this video cast. I'm very appreciative of you being my guinea pig and being quite candid with all of this, because it is somewhat of a challenging subject matter. So I'm going to say goodbye to all of you. And I want to say also, please feel free to continue sending those questions and comments and feedback. It's helpful. It helps me to shape the future episodes for particular topics that you're interested in, because I want to make this as much about you as about my project, if at all possible. Feedback helps. So until next time, I'm going to sign off for now. And this is Ken Donaldson, Sex, Addiction, and the Missing Piece, with my wonderful, what are you again? Guest. Oh, I made it through the whole thing without stumbling until then. Okay, it's perfectly imperfect too, just by the way. My wonderful guest, Holly Donaldson, my wife, and you can find out more about Holly at www.hollydonaldson.com. Thank you very much.